the characters have changed, but they're now going to go forward in some way. For characters, we basically talk about the two kind of major types of characters in a story as either protagonist or antagonist. And a protagonist then is usually the main character, the person we're meant to see as the hero, the character we're most going to identify with, usually because we know the most about this person. This person might be a flawed protagonist. They might not be, heroic, but they are the person that we're kind of going along with. The antagonist then is the character who stands in the way of the protagonist, the person who makes that protagonist's life more difficult, the person who makes it harder for the protagonist to do what he or she needs to do. So in a typical kind of hero-villain scenario, the antagonist would be the villain, while the protagonist would be the hero. It's important to note that in kind of more modern fiction, these are often the same person. Oftentimes, and think about our own lives possibly. Oftentimes we are our own worst enemies. Oftentimes we stand in the way of our own of our own happiness in some ways. Or the circumstances of our lives can be even the antagonist. It's not necessarily a clear-cut villain, for example. When we talk about characters, we generally we generally describe them as either sympathetic, which are the characters that we love, the characters that we're meant to like, or unsympathetic, those characters that we shouldn't like, those characters that we see as kind of mean or evil or whatever. Again, it's important to note when characters who are perhaps unsympathetic to begin with become sympathetic, or vice versa. It's not the typicality of things that's important probably so much as looking for areas and ways in which things fall outside of what is typical. Within a story, characters are either dynamic, meaning that they would change in the course of a narrative. So I've got the little picture of a train. So this train is moving from one point to another. So a character who grows, a character who learns something about him or herself as a result of the story would be considered dynamic. A character that doesn't change would be considered static. Another term for that is would be a flat character. So a character who is dynamic is often referred to as a round character, somebody who changes, and a character who is static is often considered a flat character, one who does not change. And I got the picture of the dog. The trusty dog is the typical character who does not change. When we talk about the setting, then, it's important to note that the setting can sometimes help us to understand how a story is to be read. It can help us understand what we're supposed to know about the characters, what we're supposed to think about the characters. It maybe will help us to establish norms for the characters. So, for example, if there's language within a story, the use of racial epithets or racial pejoratives. Certainly, if somebody was to use the N-word now in a story set now, that has a very different meaning than somebody using it set in the Deep South in the 30s or 40s. Now, that's not to say that it's that the meaning of the word has really changed. It's not to say that it wasn't a pejorative then, but our judgment of the person saying it might change slightly, based on time, based on norms. People are to some extent a result of their societies, and understanding setting can help us to see in what ways are characters a result of their societies. In what ways are they living as part of their societies? In some instances, setting can also be kind of like a character or a plot device. So, in an Edgar Allan Poe story, for example, the ominous way in which the places that characters live and breathe and work helps to set the mood. It helps to it can help us to understand the meaning behind the story. Symbolism, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Sometimes it isn't. Symbolism is the way in which a writer can um, allow us to see something and place within for that one thing something else possibly. Can help us to make more of particular elements within a story. So, for example, a withered flower. If a lot of time is spent on a withered flower, we might want to think about, what does a withered flower mean? What does it represent? I mean, it's, beauty past its prime. It's death. It's all these kinds of things. A symbol can allow the audience to connect to something bigger. So, for example, a withered flower, again, it becomes more than just the flower itself. It becomes concepts of aging. It becomes concepts of death. It becomes something more than just the flower itself. When something's used repeatedly, a symbol, a character type, a type of setting, any of those kinds of things, we would call that a motif. So a motif is just anything that's used over and over again, and if it's used more than once or twice, we can start to say, what's going on with this? What is it that's happening with this motif? Is it important in some ways? For example, when you're reading A Rose for Emily by Faulkner, you might want to notice how often he uses descriptions of kind of decay and dying. Decay and death and dying become kind of a motif in that story. The theme then is the point or the argument. So when we start talking about your writing, I'm going to ask you to have a point or a purpose, your thesis to your writing. And all pieces of literature in some way have probably some sort of a reason for being. It may be a reason for being that the author was cognizant of as he or she was writing, or maybe something that just becomes clear as we look at it. Either way, that would be the theme. And so, oftentimes when we're talking about writing about a piece of literature, we're trying to figure out, what is the theme? What's the point of this? And how does this point get expressed? What kinds of elements are being used to express this point or points? And how does everything kind of lead to this? That's one of the ways we can go about writing about literature, is to try and figure out what is the theme, how is this expressed, describing how it's expressed. That's all for today in terms of story. Again, this is our first lecture within the course, so I want to welcome you to the class. This is the first time you'll hear me speak. Hopefully this way of communicating works, and if it doesn't, please let me know. And have a great term. Thanks. I'll see you in week 2.